Hi, this is Ron Jeffries. You're listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, James Gifford, and I'm coming to you from the Agile2018 conference in beautiful San Diego. Well, it's actually not that beautiful because it's humid as heck here this week, which is seasonably unnatural for the West Coast. So tonight with me, I have Valera Kushnir. Say hi so that people know who you are.
Hey, how's it going?
Awesome.
Valera Kushnir from Allstate.
We've got Billie Schuttpelz.
Hey, how's everybody going?
And we've got Charles Neighbors.
Yeah.
Our good friend Neighbors. Wait, Allstate Neighbors. Oh my goodness, mind blown. We've just made this connection, and so tonight we're kind of gathered here at the tequila bar. So if things get a little crazy, it's not our fault. It's the tequila. But tonight, I think we were going to come together and we're going to talk about how our coaching styles as potentially individuals or consultant coaches can really impact the motivation of teams and how maybe some tips for our listeners on how we could potentially look at how we're coaching things and teams and making sure that we are creating motivated individuals as we kind of unpack this topic. So I'd like to just let you guys go. Whoever wants to go first, let's just throw it out there and get this thing going.
I think a lot of what we were kind of talking about was, toxic teams and, some of the things that we deal with on a regular basis. What do you do when you have a team that's toxic? What do you do when you have, somebody on the team that might be negatively affecting the team's ability to produce some tangible value on a regular basis? You have somebody on the team that is responsible for something, and half of everybody else's time is fixing their stuff. It's kind of hard to keep that guy on the team or that girl on the team. So.
Yeah, and we were talking about unmotivated teams, and
right.
For me, is a team unmotivated and why is kind of something that really sticks with me, because if they're unmotivated, I don't think it's because they're horrible individuals, which I feel like sometimes is what I'm getting from management and things like that. And I feel like we need to delve into, all right, if they're appearing to be unmotivated, let's look at the why behind it, rather than just assuming that they walked into work this morning and didn't feel like working, because
Sure.
I really don't think too many human beings are like that every day.
I think a lot of it can come from lack of understanding what is the actual mission of the team or the product or the company they're working for, and missing the link that explains to them how do their actions actually affect the customers. It could be coming out in different ways. Maybe just misunderstanding the goals, or maybe not seeing the value, not getting the feedback from the customers and shared with them. It kind of can become dull for some people after a while.
And Troy's talk this morning really hit me. One of the slides about this topic that I'm like, I'm going to use that right now was, oh no, I lost it. I'm sorry, Troy. One of your slides and what you were talking about really really applied to this, and I totally lost it right now. It'll come back.
Well,
to me.
I was in a session today, actually, while you're trying to get that thought back. I was in a session today, and it was an interesting session. It was called Coach Be Well. It was about self-awareness and being conscious of your own wellness in general, stress, anxiety, and things like that. Motivation. We talked a lot about that type of stuff, more on an individual basis. But these things affect teams, the culture of teams, and every team is a little bit different. But depending on some of those dynamics and the people's personalities and their emotional what affects them in different ways. You've really got to know those things to make sure that you don't kind of kill the energy and their spirit and that level of autonomy, that we're supposed to be giving teams to actually deliver value to customers without trying to control.
Yeah, absolutely. And Valera, I know you said you're a Scrum Master, and I find that one of the best gifts a good Scrum Master gives the teams that I'm observing and coaching and things is that sense of what you were just talking about with well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I bring on a new Scrum Master, I've got quite a few new Scrum Masters right now, and they're used to being project managers maybe, right? They're not used to thinking about well-being. That's not a topic that ever used to come into the corporate world. It was your hours and your capacity and all that, not how is your team feeling this week. So that's been a real hurdle for me as a coach, is getting the Scrum Masters, the newer Scrum Masters, to think about those topics, because they're unusual topics.
I think, to go along with that, so like as a Scrum Master, I find myself, and Charlie and I work closely on this together, and something I struggle with is being probably a little more invested and eager in the success of our sprints, rather than stepping back and actually being there offering to help. So I think what would be interesting for this topic, and speaking about like what are motivated teams and how do you coach motivated teams, or how do you motivate teams to be coachable, to first figure out like what does a team look like, for a Scrum team, right? Like what are the characteristics that team members as a whole should have, whether they're new to Scrum, whether they're new to Agile, or if they're experienced somebody. What do you guys think?
I mean, do we, it comes back to, have we fallen into that trap of actually putting the process and tools over the individuals and interactions? And a lot of what we see when we start out with kind of dysfunctional teams is we're so focused on the actual process and getting people to do things right and do things by the book. Like, thou shalt have a stand-up, and it shall have these 3 questions, and it should go for 15 minutes. Well, in the beginning, a team may just need to get together, and it may take a half an hour, and they may fumble through things. But as a Scrum Master, it's important to create that environment where it's okay to suck at your stand-up, and we'll incrementally get you better and help you understand that benefit and value of the actual practice. And I think that's where a lot of young and new Scrum Masters fall down. They go to the CSM, they get their 2-day cert, but when they walk out of that class, they can't actually articulate to the team the value that the daily stand-up brings to the table. And so we focus on, we need to do this. It needs to be 15 minutes, and you need to answer my 3 questions. And, when I coach new teams and Scrum Masters, I just throw the 3 questions right out the window, and I go, guys, what do we want this board to look like tomorrow, and what's going to stop us from getting there? Almost like you're actually doing a retrospective right there at the board, but it's planning. And, while that throws people for a loop, a lot of times it starts to have some really good conversations around, yeah, we think we can get this done. Dude, I need your help, and we definitely can get this done. And, Mike, if you can go talk to this guy over here on this team and make sure that they've got this thing ready for at least about this done so we can try to integrate it, we could definitely get these 4 things done and maybe start working on this defect. And it changes that planning dynamic of people standing around in a circle giving the Scrum Master a status report. And so sometimes it's about turning it on its head and getting people to focus on an outcome as opposed to, did I check these 3 boxes during my stand-up?
Yeah, I like that. I like that style. Yeah. And I finally remembered Troy's slide. So I was thinking of a specific team in my head, and where the product owner / Scrum Master kept saying the team was unmotivated and lazy, and literally lazy, and using other words like that. And in Troy's keynote, Troy Magenis, thank you, in your keynote this morning, your data showed that, or data, we'll talk about Australia and data versus data. But it showed that if they don't start early enough, so it's not actually that they're lazy, it's not actually that they're unmotivated. Like, now I actually can go back to Troy's keynote and give that to my clients and stuff and explain the fact that perhaps the reason they're not meeting their goals is because we didn't start soon enough. It's not that they're trying to be lazy. Mm-hmm. So that was cool.
So what does that look like? Do we hire based on the fit when it comes to a team? Do we hire people that absolutely have no experience just to avoid bad habits? And then do we, I think I'm just...
Well, I think unfortunately, in my opinion, the answer is it depends, right? And so, which is basically a yes to your question.
I can't believe you just said that.
So, because
it's the
there's
consulting
context,
answer.
There's a lot of different things that, that you have to consider whenever you're bringing somebody on. When we brought you on, for instance, right, there were other candidates that might have had maybe a little bit more experience or whatever some of those characteristics were, but we could see the cultural fit. And we could see that the ceiling was really high in terms of where we felt like you were going to be able to go in that role, and then your ability to transition into other roles because you're so curious and you love technology. So a lot of that was the reasoning for some of the hiring and the decisioning. This just happens to be Valera, but those things are like super important. He had the skills and the experience that we wanted, but he wasn't like some senior uber, like I'm almost going to be a coach guy just yet, right? We may all be working for him eventually, but right now, he was the perfect fit for that team and what they needed: fresh eyes, a fresh perspective, a fresh way of thinking and working that they just weren't used to.
In a lot of organizations, though, to speak to your question, they don't get a choice on, you're actually taking existing people, existing devs, and putting them into team formations.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you don't get to hire new people. Therefore, that's where it comes into learning the people, learning the personalities, the well-being, like you were talking about, skill sets, you're mapping skill sets. You're probably, if it's an existing group, like my current one, they were actually mapping a little bit of the social interactions as well, knowing what team members did get along with each other and what ones didn't.
That's actually really important.
Yeah.
Well, and some of the so one of the things that we have been able to do at the company we're working at is actually promote the ability for teams to self-select their self-organizing team. We all know what we need to develop to support the product. But at the same time, and it's proved well, and we've had definitely some teams that have picked some bad teammates, and it didn't work out. But we gave them that freedom to self-select we had the right to override their makeups because we had generally had the understanding of their skill makeups and things like that. But we at least gave them hey, we need a team that looks like this. Who wants to be on that team? And gave them the autonomy to do that. And we've had to course correct and fix some of those things, and people didn't gel, but the teams at least learned to get that core base team there, and we've been tweaking it ever since, which has worked out really well. In other places, we literally did DISC, which is it's a personality assessment for those not familiar with it, and we literally looked at the DISC assessments across 500 people, and then went, all right, well, right now, this current people supporting this product, it's one guy that's really got the driving capability, and then the rest of these guys are basically just like the kickers, and they're not going to be a really effective team or become self-organizing because we have all of these personality types, and we've got this one guy who just drives, and that's actually what's going to make the team. That's where all the direction's going to come from. So it's like we need to bring some people into the chemistry of this team that diffuse some of this and that driving characteristic, which was really successful. But a lot of companies don't want to invest the time and to start looking at those personal profile dynamics, even like the Myers-Briggs, and figuring out because we will assemble teams that just inherently are dysfunctional because of the initial makeup set that we've given them.
Yeah, I used the DISC once on a recent client, and they were having communication problems. So I did it just for one session, and we focused on how to communicate with the other personality styles, and it diffused a lot of that conflict really quickly. It was great. Yes, how are you going to say something?
I was just going to say that kind of that initial investment and the time that it takes in order to do some of those things, we've suggested that same sort of approach because we had some mature teams, and we felt like they're not motivated, they don't feel, and they're not really accountable for what they're delivering. Well, if we just let them create their own teams and just tell them what we want to deliver over the next quarter, and then let them kind of self-select. And there was a timing thing, a visibility to the project excuse. There was, I don't know, we got to hurry up and get this stuff out the door, so we're going to restructure, we're going to create component teams, or whatever the situation was. But it's the same thing, though. It's just that we just don't want to make that investment because it's messy. We know it's going to be messy and bumpy, and let them figure it out. But it's messy and bumpy anyway, even when you don't let them figure it out on their own. But you end up with people who aren't, they're not going to own what they're doing. They don't feel like that team is really theirs. It was given to them by somebody else. You lose a lot of those benefits if you're willing to wait and kind of let them mature and move through the process of building the right team, it pays off in the long run.
So as coaches, how do we? Assuming we have a team that maybe lost the side of the light, right? Maybe they are a little bit stagnant. Maybe they are, kind of thirsty for new ideas.
I just have to ask. Did you say lost on this side of the light?
I think
lost the light.
They lost the light.
That's
Yes.
awesome.
I was thinking about the end of the tunnel and all that kind of stuff.
I love it.
Are you from Canada?
I am not. No, but maybe they're just in a spot to where they are just they want to put in a minimum kind of level of effort, for whatever reason, right? And as coaches, like as we come in and let's say maybe it's a new team or maybe it's a team that's been around for a while. As a coach, how do we come in and actually coach this team to the point where they feel like it's their ideas, like they feel like the change is coming from their own desire. But at the same time, how do we actually don't get too much invested into the actual success and maybe stay in a place where we're okay with actually failing completely and not working out?
I think you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier when you were talking about finding the root cause of things, and really taking the time to ask the right questions and get down there and figure out really what the actual issue is.
Yeah, I think I'd probably approach it like if I saw a lot of apathy. Like for me, that's kind of people are feeling very apathetic, right? They come into work. So I would take the human perspective. We spend more time with the people at work than we do with our own families, right? And so if we just remember that and think, how do we make that better? Because it really sucks when that sucks. So I would start to build their team relationships. So I wouldn't even probably address what we see as the problem. I would just start to build their human connections with each other and see if it evolved, if the motivation and the apathy started to expel on its own. Because my guess, what I've seen over time, is that they would start to bond, and then they would start to step up for each other, and they would start to help each other, and then it becomes that they're at work, maybe not to build the product, but maybe to help each other. And I'm okay with that, right? Like, I'm okay if they're not there to build the best product in the world. If they're actually there as human beings interacting with each other, I still think that's a win.
And I think some of that comes down to, we have Scrum Masters and we have coaches, and they're supposed to really be there to shepherd and mentor and coach teams. And one thing that we don't ever really focus on with the Scrum Masters is actual facilitation and how we actually facilitate and use good facilitation techniques to find those dysfunctional personalities within an actual meeting setting. And so some of your team dynamics are literally people just frustrated with other people's dysfunctions and how they act in a meeting. And so as a Scrum Master, while you may not actually be indirectly coaching people, by you actually coming in and being a strong facilitator and understand how to read a room and the people and their dysfunctions, you can start to diffuse a lot of that nonsense and mayhem that happens in teams by actually just diffusing the bad blood. And we've actually seen that with strong facilitation, you can overcome some of the team dysfunctions that keep them from gelling by basically creating that safe environment, and they don't even see it. It's like, hey, I'm the magical Wizard of Oz, and I'm back here pulling these strings, but we're having a really productive meeting, and we're killing some of those anti-patterns with team dynamics by strong facilitation. And it's like we don't invest enough in our Scrum Masters in teaching them facilitation. We send them to a 2-day class and we say, here's Scrum. But in reality, it's about facilitation. And a lot of these facilitation techniques help to create strong teams.
It's a really underused skill, yeah.
Yeah,
I absolutely agree.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking, like, for myself, I mean, I'll gladly admit, I think at this table, I'm definitely the person with least experience. And being at a conference of this size for the first time, the huge part that I've been in 4 facilitation sessions in 3 days. And, not only these sessions have been amazing, but also like how eye-opening they are for that exact same reason that you mentioned. It is not emphasized enough, understanding the people dynamics in the room and actually facilitating them to a specific outcome or just steering them towards an outcome is something that we definitely don't get enough training. And I find myself, as an athlete and just somebody that's kind of a little more, more motivated, more invested in the success of our delivery. I just find myself trying to fix those things rather than actually facilitating.
Yeah, awesome. It's a great insight. Good job. Yeah, that's awesome.
I think too, one thing that, as a Scrum Master, if you're so emotionally invested in the success of other people, that when they don't accomplish their goals or they fail, you feel like you're a failure, you're kind of missing it. You're kind of taking a little bit too much on. You know what I mean? You can't tie your success, to the behaviors of everyone else, and one
Easier
of the,
said than done, right?
yeah, well, one of the key things too is that what we do is especially in large organizations and enterprises, we say, hey, we don't have any Scrum Masters. Who are going to be the Scrum Masters? Who do you think they're going to be?
It happens a lot, yeah.
They're going to be all the PMs, right?
Yeah.
Whether they have the skill set to actually, function within that role, or be successful, or if they even, a lot of times they don't even want to be Scrum Masters, but we put them into that role anyway. So we give them the title, we send them to a CSM class, right? They get a certification, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden they're Scrum Masters, right? And they don't have those facilitation skills. They can't read a room, right? And they don't know some of the common pitfalls and patterns that people fall into whenever they take a certain path. And what ends up happening is we fail those people in terms of setting them up for success. In my opinion, a lot of times that's what ends up happening. Those new Scrum Masters need mentors. They need somebody to shadow them, come alongside them and help them through that process. And I just don't think we do enough of that either.
Yeah, I feel like facilitation could change the world. I love facilitation, right? I literally believe if everybody could be a good facilitator, the world would be different. But what I've seen in the larger, I work in really large enterprises for years. And what I've seen is that the older generations went through things, it was called rapid. And there were a couple things that came through the corporations in the 80s and 90s that actually taught corporate employees how to facilitate. It became a movement like lean and stuff like that. And we haven't had that in probably 10 to 15 years. So I think I gained those skills because I started out as a trainer and an actress. And so when you combine acting, theater, plus training, you naturally bring in some of the more dramatic elements. So I sought out ways to learn how to facilitate. But the generation before me got them in the corporate world. I sought them out because I was interested in those topics, but I'm not seeing anything right now that is actually a really good way to learn those skills. There's not one place to go, right? There's 10 books, there's a ton of conference talks. So I do see it as kind of a need right now. It's not very focused. I just have to tell people, here's what I use, here's some of the resources I go to. But luckily with the internet now, there's a lot of ways to Google retrospective exercises and things like that. But there's also in-person facilitation skills that need to be learned.
Supply and demand issue? It seems like we kind of do, and that's contributing to some of the problem as well.
Well, qualified Scrum Masters are basically, right now we're literally interviewing people. I've probably interviewed 55 people right now and haven't found a qualified Scrum Master that has the skills that I'm looking for. And I think it's the nature of the business and the fact that I can have 2 years of CSM and have been a Scrum Master for 2 years. I can pretty much go out and get a $125,000 or better job. Some of the certification game has created some of those problems. We're right now with the path that we're going with our Scrum Master roles at the company I'm at. I don't care if you have a CSM. What I care is you're bringing in these soft skills to the business, and whether you're a project manager, you're a QA tester. I'm looking for personality traits that make a good Scrum Master. I can teach you Scrum, but I can't teach you soft skills at a cost-effective rate.
Amen.
So I don't care if you have a CSM. What I care about is that you embody something that looks like servant leadership. You can hold a conversation. You have a desire to learn. A Scrum Master needs to understand the domain that the teams are developing in so that they can have some empathy and understanding of what the heck the developers are struggling with. And if you can't quickly understand some domain designs that are simple, it's not hard to understand that this web server, that this front end is on this web server, which ties to these 3 or 4 load balancers, which data comes from this service, from this database. like that generic flow of that domain, and then understanding a little bit about, like, if I'm in the healthcare domain, I need to understand a little bit in this part of the healthcare domain. I don't have to be worrying about FINRA Part 1211, some government regulation, because I'm not controlled by that. But I have to be concerned about HIPAA. So if I know that I need to be concerned about HIPAA, I don't have to have this, which, when you're really in that FDA space, there's really strict validation and really specific things you have to do with testing and how development teams. But if I'm just worrying about HIPAA, I've got a free plate, and all I care about is that you can start to kind of understand it. So, while I'm looking for them, while I may shy away from somebody with financial institution experience, if I'm in that later section where I'm worried more about HIPAA, and I have a person that's got a financial background but have all the soft skills, I can teach you about how the HIPAA regulation pieces work of it. So I start to look at those transferable skills and say, I'm more concerned about those than what your resume actually says. And I make those hiring decisions from that. And that's why, as we've kind of gone through this and we've had some success with some hybrid Scrum Masters that are literally coming directly from the development team, other teams we've failed miserably, other teams we've converted project managers, other groups we've converted BAs, but we were looking for those transferable skills and going, I don't care that you don't have a CSM. We can teach you the Scrum.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But, and it's had good, we've had less success with the hybrid Scrum Masters because you usually get pulled back into development tasks as opposed to fully running a team. So we do lose some productivity on that, but I have some developers now that are like, I really don't even want to develop anymore. I want to pursue this career of being a Scrum Master because I'm passionate about using my knowledge of software to create awesome teams. And those are the guys that I want to invest in to keep them engaged with technology, but then use that as a mechanism to build out technical coaching within the organization because the light bulbs clicked for them and they understand Agile and they're hungry for the mechanics of it and why test-driven development's important, why collective code ownership's there, and why we need to limit work in progress. And they're going to be able to coach a team on that actual technical stuff that James Gifford, who's 6 years removed from development, and while I can talk a good game, I'm not still the most technical savvy guy, but I read a lot of books, I hunger for knowledge, so I can keep up a really good conversation, but as soon as you go back skin deep, I might as well get a shovel out and dig myself a hole.
I'm with you there.
But if I can build that technical competency and technical coaching, because go try to hire a technical coach right now in the market and you're screwed.
Yeah.
They're all either independent consultants.
Supply and demand again,
So I need to be able to, at some point, be able to grow technical coaching in my organization. And, it's something that nobody's focusing on.
So I think you kind of brought it back a little bit in the direction, well, does a Scrum Master or a coach need to be a developer or close to that level? Like how deep do they need to be when it comes to technology, right? I mean, you kind of touched a little bit on that, right? Like understanding the basics. But then it's a never-ending debate, right? Should a Scrum Master know code?
I think the Scrum Master needs to know those concepts and understand how they enable us to deliver value to our customers, and then maybe the level of complexity involved in certain techniques and ways of working, a certain stack or technology. You need to have awareness around those things. I don't personally think that Scrum Masters need to know how to code, but if they do, it is absolutely a bonus. I think that folks with that skill set that have those soft skills also, there's some unicorns out there. You know what I mean? But and to your point, they're hard to find.
You go to try to find Amitai Schleier.
I know, right?
Amitai is and I haven't given him a shout out in a long time, but I heart that guy. He just gets it, and he can talk to a team, and he can write code and teach you. He can sit shoulder to shoulder with you and do TDD in pretty much anything because he wants to learn the languages, he wants to learn the technology, and he's one of those people that are going to teach you about moving teams to the work and not the other way around. So it's about cross-skilling people, and it's okay for them to go learn a new language to deliver this product because they're a highly functioning team and they'll pick it up.
And I think the key word you hit on there, the word that came to my mind about Amitai is curiosity. So he brings curiosity to everything he does, and if I go back to the years when I was a new Scrum Master and I don't code, like I'll just be fully upfront about that. But my teams loved me because I brought curiosity, and I would sit in on their meetings and watch what was kind of mob programming at the time years ago. But I wanted to see their screens. I wanted to see what they were doing. I wanted to understand what certain words meant and what other words didn't mean. And I drew diagrams for management explaining why we were moving code, where we were moving it. So I was the Scrum Master for them that was curious and asking questions about their world, where previously they had just had project managers that just wanted a percentage in hours and things like that. So I got a lot of feedback that they appreciated that I could explain things to management and free them up so they didn't have to explain things to management and draw diagrams. So if there are Scrum Masters out there or new people that want to become Scrum Masters, I encourage you to bring curiosity. So even if you don't have the technical background, if you're willing to learn, like you were talking about, that enough of what's going on for them, what does their world look like, and why are they saying this is going to take so long? Like, dig in and understand that, right? Like, understand what's going on for them. Mm-hmm. Attend their calls, sit in the calls, like things like that. So,
and kind of bringing back that being interested and being curious about their domain knowledge, that helps you as an individual build empathy for them.
Yeah.
And when people feel that you care about them, most likely they're going to trust you more. And the better trust you have, when we have those tough situations where you need to coach the team, if the team doesn't trust you and feel that you care about them, they're going to be less receptive to that coaching, which is also going to then start to bring down the morale, because then they're going to feel like you're telling them what to do. And I think that a lot of our dysfunctional coaching situations or teams that are unmotivated are either being handed the "thou shalt follow this process," but they don't know why. There isn't an empathetic person around, guys, like, look, I know that this sucks, but here's what we need to do now. And the second that we can start showing success, we could then propose to the management that let's move to this outcome-based thing where we have these 10 outcomes that need to come, and how we get to those 10 outcomes where it doesn't really matter as long as we're hitting those outcomes. And then agility starts to become less about the process and just more about becoming focused on outcomes. And that's the thing that we're really trying to instill with teams today at the company we're at, is that yes, you need to do refinement, but coming out of refinement, you guys should have out of a refinement session, here's some outcomes that you should have. And whether you do that through story mapping, impact mapping, just some good old-fashioned invest, maybe doing use cases. Maybe you bust out Alistair Coburn's old-ass book, which is still very valuable, and do some use cases. However you're going to figure out how to get that work done, I don't care, as long as you get to this list of things. And teams are going to be more motivated to kind of experiment and feel that freedom. And so then that starts to drive that empowerment. And the more that teams are successful and understand why they didn't come to those outcomes, that starts to build resiliency. And, we recently had, his name is eluding me, but it's Dr. something or other, when we talked about zombie agile, and he's the guy that did Kneffin. And we're all just drawing a blank.
I know, right?
And he's like, wait, what is Kneffin? I think isn't it the siphon diagram? No, guys, it's actually Kneffin. But so he started to talk. We started talking about it, but it's more about helping teams become resilient. And through the act of creating resiliency in your teams and the abilities to create a safe to fail environment is really what starts to build motivated teams, because it becomes okay to fail. And if we're truly doing Scrum, we've built a short failure cycle in there.
Right.
Of every 2 weeks, we can fail and we can learn from it and we can move on. And, you have coaches promoting right now, like the daily retrospective or like on the demand retrospective, or when you're doing mob programming, it's literally like an instant retrospective right there and then. So people are starting, if we start to bring those kind of concepts in, it starts to build resiliency in the team, which the outcomes of resiliency eventually build happy people. It's that indirect correlation, but people aren't seeing that. They just want to measure the happiness of a team.
Right. Well, yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of what a keynote. I'm sorry, I'm not as good with author names, but our keynote speaker this morning, how he spoke about how we should be building metric systems and dashboards that actually, not only obviously point the problems, but they are actually safe for the people. Like they don't create an unsafe environment for people to where they're afraid of things to be found out. They're afraid of something being noticed, and then they hide.
They hide it, yeah.
That's our boy Troy McGinnis.
Yes.
Heart him a lot.
I love Troy.
But
I just want to point out something about what you said, though. So to pull out like a key phrase that you were talking about and put it into a real person, like someone I'm coaching right now, a leader I'm coaching right now, he is able to say, yes, this sucks, but here's why I'm doing it. And he exposes that to the entire group, to the entire department. And they trust him immensely because he acknowledges that I hate metrics, or I hate what we have to do right now, or this is why we're doing it. But he casts the big vision for them. And you talked about that. But like leaders out there, that's an incredible skill. He has built psychological safety amongst his team and his people. They trust him nonstop because he admits that something might be bad. He might not like having to do it for a moment, but he shows them the bigger picture, the strategy. So it's a good skill.
Yeah, I think like when I heard you started talking about resilience a little bit, and we're constantly talking about autonomy. It's like the word it's like it doesn't mean anything anymore, but it made me think that like in order to get that resilience that you're talking about, like autonomy and resilience are not mutually exclusive. In order to be resilient and have that level of confidence in what you're building and have that energy that you need and the creativity and the space that you need to build really cool stuff, you know what I mean? You've got to have a level of autonomy that isn't really puppet strings that's being controlled by proxies outside of your org or around your team. Letting people be responsible for the outcomes of what they're going to deliver and how they're going to solve problems isn't really a very easy thing to do.
Right, it's hard, yeah.
And as coaches, as managers and things like that, we set things up in a way for new teams to get them along. But if we don't take the controls that we put in place and some of the patterns that we put in place for them as bumpers, as they're getting their own feet and understand how to do it on their own, we have to pull that stuff out and let them create their new bumpers and their own guidance and things like that, the stuff that they're going to do, or else they continue to just repeat the patterns that we set up for them, and it's more of just control from management or a coach or a scrum master or whoever set it up for them. We've got to be able to find a way to take that back and give control to the team, or else they're really never going to be truly autonomous.
I love the bumpers. So I use that analogy or picture as well. And, like when you go bowling in the States, you can have these blow up things that go into the aisle, and we call those bumpers, right? So I've been working in Australia, and I had to so I was using that analogy, and I'm like, I have to actually ask, do you guys, number one, know what bowling is? And number two, do you have these blow up things or things that go? And they're like, yeah, we totally get it. But
Valera uses the bumpers when we bowl.
Yes.
I mean, they've got bowling in India, so they have to have bowling in Australia.
But it's great. I'm constantly saying, here's the bumpers. Do whatever you want in between them. Like, just experiment.
And when I generally talk about it, I'm talking about a set of guardrails. And today we might set out with a walking path, but our vision for you guys is to get to a 2-lane road.
Right.
And you're free to operate in that 2-lane road, but here are the bumpers that we need. Here we got you down to a walking path at this point.
Right now.
It's like the Autobahn. You can drive as fast as you want as long as you stay on the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's all good.
Well, guys, we're coming up to about 40 minutes, and we all joked about how are we going to fill a bunch of time. And you get some bunch of passionate Agile practitioners together. You can clearly see we can just riff on things for an hour. So just kind of want to close us out. Let's talk about let's kind of round out some people with maybe a tip that we could take away from this podcast or something that we've learned tonight, and then we'll close this out by giving you guys some time to promote something, a talk that you've got coming up or an event that you want to plug, and then maybe some contact information on how people can find you to continue this conversation. So we'll kind of head towards Billie.
Yeah, sure. So the thing that I didn't throw out when we were talking about facilitation, so my tip is don't get overwhelmed by the word. It's a really big word. Here's the best thing you can ever do. Everybody asks, what's my favorite facilitation technique? I call it whiteboarding. So you hand somebody a whiteboard marker and you invite them, invite them to a whiteboard conversation. I literally say, do you have a minute to whiteboard with me? I like to use it that way. It changes everything. So that's my tip for facilitation. Just start there, invite people to a whiteboard. And my Twitter handle is @oopslandbilly, @OOPS, oops, LAND, Billy, BILLIE.
Awesome.
Well, this is Charlie Neighbors. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate this awesome conversation. In terms of tips, I'm probably I'll steal Dean Leffingwell. Did a session earlier in the week and basically said at every single milestone, minor or major, you need to be asking yourself, are you still doing the right thing? So you're providing an opportunity for yourself to make that shift and change gears if you have to, or pivot, or whatever you want to call it. But don't always think that you're always going to be on the right path. What the right path was today might not be the same as tomorrow. So be conscious of that. Self-aware.
Awesome.
I don't exactly have a tip, but I guess I can share something that I am working on personally. And Charlie touched about it a little bit earlier, but as a Scrum Master, you obviously you want your team to succeed. Absolutely. But just an encouragement to people that maybe are similar to me is, like, don't hang your worth on that success. Sometimes, obviously we're all people. Some people are just not going to take your advice, right? Or they do not want your advice. And they might come to a different conclusion on their own that might be successful, or it might actually bring them to failure. And that's okay. It doesn't minimize the impact that you had on that group or organization. And as well, thank you so much for having us. This is this has been incredible.
This is awesome.
Agile2018 is awesome, and if anyone wants to talk to me, I'm Valera Kushnir on every social media, including my own website.
Awesome. And I'm James Gifford, and I don't really have anything insightful to say other than it doesn't matter if you have a CSM or not. We care about your transferable skills. So, and if you want to find me, you can find me at the Scrumando on Twitter. It's just at Scrumando. You can find me on LinkedIn, basically at the Scrumando, or you can find me on the Coalition. Guess what? At Scrumando. And so, again, this has been a Agile Uprising podcast. If you like us, leave us a review on iTunes. 5 stars helps us get higher in the ratings pool and gets us exposed to more people. And we don't really talk about our Patreon thing, but if you want to help us keep being able to host these podcasts and things like that and want to contribute, please help us out with Patreon. And thank you for our faithful listeners, and have a great night.